and Fred Locken, and Royal College of Recognize Canadian College and a professor of physics.
My name is Victor Munson.
My name is Abby Seelger.
And my name is Ray Cavallo, and we're Unit 2 from Union High School. Our people teacher is Mr. Richard Clark, and our Unit 2 coach is Matthew Thornton.
So we are going to start with question number 3 today. What were the major differences between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists? How did the arguments of the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists reflect their points of view regarding natural rights, republicanism, and the powers of the states? Why are the Federalist and Anti-Federalist debates still relevant today?
The government shutdown, which took place on October 1st of this year, serves as an excellent example of how relevant the Federalist and Anti-Federalist debates still are. In today's system, those opposed to the Affordable Care Act, such as Ted Cruz, are more in line with the Anti-Federalist view on state sovereignty, whereas the proponents desire a national standard for health care. This is an age-old debate that men like Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, Patrick Henry, and George Mason would not be foreign to as they debated the ratification of the Constitution following the Philadelphia Convention.
The major differences between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists were their views on the role of government following their experiences with British government during colonization, the Revolutionary War, and the Articles of Confederation. Charles Pickney, in his speech to the South Carolina House of Representatives in 1788, argued that great inconveniences were experienced as resulting from the inefficacy of the Confederation.
The Federalists advocated for consolidating power in a strong central government in an attempt to avoid land and economic wars between 13 individual sovereign states. The Anti-Federalists desired 13 independent states because of the prosperity such a system brought the states during the age of salutary neglect.
Though differing on many issues, the Anti-Federalists and Federalists did, however, share a Republican vision that was far less communal and much more individualistic than the classical ideal. Their highest priority was to protect and promote individual rights and liberties, as well as derive the government's power from the people. However, in regards to republicanism, the Anti-Federalists believed that this form of representative government could only exist and succeed in a small, homogeneous community. They believed that a large, diverse nation could not sustain such a republic.
The Anti-Federalist views of natural rights were built off the views expressed by John Locke in his writings on government and the social contract. The government, according to the Anti-Federalists, exists only for the people, and the rights of the people must always precede the powers of the government. Another contention of the Anti-Federalist views of the form of federal government proposed at the Philadelphia Convention was the powers of the states laid out in Article 1, Section 9.
The Anti-Federalists believed that the answer to the problems facing the United States in 1787 would not be solved by drastically increasing the power of the federal government, while simultaneously diminishing the power of the states. Federal Farmer 1 states, it leaves the powers of government and the representation of the people so unnaturally divided between the general and state governments that the operations of our system must be very uncertain. The Anti-Federalists fervently advocated for the reduction of federal authority and the states' rights to retain sovereignty. They were partially appeased by the inclusion of the Bill of Rights, especially the 10th Amendment.
In Federalist 51, James Madison writes, "In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself." The Federalist stance on natural rights is similar to the views discussed by Thomas Hobbes in his book, The Leviathan. Men need government in order to provide for an efficient and functioning society, and this need for a government precedes the rights of the people, but does not take away the rights of the people.
In a speech to the New York Ratifying Convention, Alexander Hamilton clearly stated the Federalist stance on the powers of the states. This balance between the national and state governments ought to be dwelt on with peculiar attention, as it is of the utmost importance. It forms a double security to the people. If one encroaches on their rights, they will find a powerful protection in the other. In the majority opinion of McCulloch v. Merrill, Chief Justice John Marshall references the Federalist and Anti-Federalist debates in regards to the powers of the states by siding with Congress on the basis that the states give up their ultimate sovereignty by ratifying the Constitution. Thank you.
Very nice job. Looking at American history as your guide, who is right about the need for a Bill of Rights, the Federalists or the Anti-Federalists?
Looking at history, we can see that the Anti-Federalists were right in the need for a Bill of Rights. Due to the fact that rights were not adequately protected under the body of the Constitution through Article 1, Section 9, and the need for such rights as freedom of religion and freedom of speech were not included in the body of the Constitution, but were included later and have been needed throughout American history.
The Federalists believed that the Bill of Rights was not necessary, as in Federalist Paper number 84, Alexander Hamilton says that it is a dangerous doctrine, as in a concurrent argument that if the rights that were listed in the document existed, what would not stop the government from infringing on rights that were not listed in the document?
However, the anti-federalist stance is shown in John DeWitt 3, as John DeWitt stated that civil liberties have been promoted by the free discussion of public measures and by the conduct of public men, which demonstrates that as individual liberties such as the freedom of speech and the freedom of protest need to be protected.
Although they believe that the rights such as habeas corpus were already protected in Article 1, Section 9, we can see that Abraham Lincoln in 1862 suspended the writ of habeas corpus to stop rioters in Maryland.
Thank you. One legacy of the Articles of Confederation established was a fear and distrust of a strong national government. Do you think this fear was legitimate, and how has this fear affected American political life in the last 50 years?
Yes, the anti-federalists had the fear of a strong central government. And because Patrick Henry at the Virginia Ratifying Convention stated that liberty ought to be the direct end of government. And when the government starts to control interactions between the states, such as in Gibbons v. Ogden, in which the Supreme Court declared that Congress has the exclusive right to regulate interstate commerce among the states, that fear has been realized.
However, to disagree with Ray, I think there's a need for a stronger fear in regards to state sovereignty, that the federal government is not the one, should not have been the one that they had as huge distrust in. And as we can see today, with Arizona having immigration laws that far surpass the federal mandate for what a state needs to do for immigration laws, such as the Show Me Your Papers law, we can see that state governments themselves are not any more trustworthy than a federal state or a federal government.
I'd like to disagree with what Victor said, that the states have the individual interests of the constituents within their own state, like more in the forefront of their mind, such as in Michigan, in which the people there have voted to not follow the federal program of affirmative action because they feel it better suits the individual interests of the people within their state.
Do you believe that the National Bill of Rights was necessary given the federal design of the Constitution?
Yes.
Could you explain?
Yes, as George Mason said in his objections to the Constitution at the Philadelphia Convention, the declarations of rights among the several states are no security, because the federal stance was that the states had declarations of rights that would make a Bill of Rights unnecessary. But certain states, such as New York, did not even have a Bill of Rights in their state constitution.
They also believe, the Federalists, that if you wrote down those rights, they would simply become a parchment barrier, and that the federal government would try to work around the wording of the specific right and would find ways to violate it.
You touched on this a little bit, but I'd kind of like you to expand a little more. Federalists believe that the state governments were more likely to abuse their powers than the federal government. Can you provide more examples from history and it explains a little more on that happened?
Is it all right if you restate the question?
And so the Federalists believe that state governments were more likely to abuse their powers than the federal governments. You guys talked a little bit about this in some of your responses. Are there more examples from history that they were looking at that happened, or?
Well, a good example would come from 1957, when President Eisenhower had to issue an executive order in order to desegregate the school that the state government or the state governor had not allowed the African American students to be entered into the school. In fact, there were several protests outside, which shows that state governments, in some situations, oftentimes do not have the best interests of the people and are oftentimes more powerful and more dangerous than the federal government.
Such as the Supreme Court case of Meyer v. Nebraska, Nebraska had instituted a state law that forbade foreign language education in the K-12 system, and the Supreme Court ruled that unconstitutional and struck down that state law. That's an example of the federal government enforcing its power over a wrongdoing of the state.
You can also see the fear of the state governments in that although the federal government gives the time, place, and manner of voting to the states, many states have put in place policies that make it very hard for, say, illegal immigrants or just residents of the U.S. to be able to vote.
To show the other side, though, the anti-federalists were not so much as afraid of states overstepping their bounds, but of the national government overstepping their bounds. And that's seen through the anti-federalist argument in Brutus 1, which cites Article 1, Section 8, and Article 6, Section 2, the Necessary and Proper Clause and Supremacy Clause, respectively, as overstepping the bounds of local and state governments.
Thank you. Some Americans argue that our Constitution is no longer able to guide us through the 21st cultural and political realities. Given that, what necessary changes to our Constitution do you think are necessary? And please explain.
The amendment process is essential to maintaining the living standard of our Constitution to make it applicable to our modern issues today.
I believe that the Constitution is not so much responsible for changing today as just the politicians themselves. You can see that as just recently the Democrats in the Senate led by Patty Murray and the Republicans in the Senate led by, in the House led by Congressman Paul Ryan. They have finally come together on a proposed budget deal that the House has just passed.
As long as you have a separate independent executive and judicial branch, do you feel it's still necessary to see bicameralism as the structure of the legislative branch?
Well, one of the main duties of the president is, in regards to the legislative branch, is that he vetoes bills that is placed before him. So if the House and the Senate were both controlled by the same party, having the president of an opposing party allows another check on political licensure.
And as Madison said, a government more consonant with the views of the larger states is not likely to be accepted by the smaller states. And this idea that the bicameral House offers yet just another check on this idea of you need proportional representation in the lower house, but you also need equal representation in order to have a balance between the people's power as well as the state's power.
Does the federal system of government, born out of the Philadelphia Convention, establish effective limits and power and protections of individual liberty or create confusion and inefficiency? Explain.
Could you repeat your questions?
So, does the federal system, does the national government establish effective limits on power and protections of individual liberty, or is it meant to create confusion and inefficiency?
Well, the federal system split between the states and the central government is essential. Like in the 10th Amendment, it's not explicitly stating what the states can do, but simply stating that things not given directly to the central government can be delegated to the states.
The Connecticut Compromise, the Philadelphia Convention, wasn't just a random compromise in which they decided a random government. It was a compromise between the New Jersey plan, the New York plan, as well as the Virginia plan, in which they they brought together these 3 different systems of government that were all very diverse and different, and they brought them together and picked the best pieces out of all of them, and all compromised and agreed that this was going to be the best form of government. So I do not believe that it was meant to create confusion, but it was meant to defend the